Joe DiMaggio's name is up there with Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, and others as a Yankee hero and baseball hero. But to some people, he was the villain because he was hated.
Every time I walked into the Yankee Stadium, I hated those pinstripes. There was nobody I wanted to be.
But the animosity was mutual. And here are 8 players Joe DiMaggio hated the most. Starting our list at player number 8 is Bob Feller. Joe DiMaggio never said it out loud, but if there was one pitcher who could crawl under his skin, it was Bob Feller. Feller wasn't just good, he was a force of nature. A pitcher whose fastball blurred past hitters before they could even register the swing. For most players, facing Feller was a nightmare. For DiMaggio, it was something worse. It was a reminder that even legends could be made to look mortal. When the Yankees squared off against Cleveland, the crowd knew they might be about to witness something unforgettable. One summer afternoon in 1938, DiMaggio stepped to the plate against Feller. The count tightened, 2 strikes hanging heavy in the air. Feller unleashed a fastball that split the zone like lightning, and DiMaggio swung through it, missing by inches. The next pitch, a slider with cruel bite, sent him fouling weakly into the stands before Feller finished him off. The moment stung. In the clubhouse later that night, DiMaggio sat in silence, replaying the sequence, as if Feller had reached into his mind and stolen his timing. Those battles became a pattern. Every time Joe strode to the box with Feller on the mound, he wasn't just testing his swing, he was testing his pride. Feller's arsenal was relentless. Fastballs that left batters late even when they guessed right. Breaking balls that danced out of reach. For a hitter who thrived on rhythm and grace, Feller was chaos wrapped in control. That was where the tension lived. It wasn't pure hatred, but something sharper than admiration. Feller forced DiMaggio to confront the uncomfortable truth that even the greatest could be undone. Each strikeout cut deeper, and each walk back to the dugout carried a quiet sting. Although DiMaggio respected the fireballer, he never quite shook the feeling that Bob Feller was the one man who could turn him human. In the end, what DiMaggio felt for Feller was a cocktail of grudging respect and lingering frustration. This was understandable since they played against each other, but the next player was on the same team as DiMaggio. Player number 7 is former teammate Mickey Mantle. He and DiMaggio felt like Batman and Robin. Mickey Mantle had been playing semi-professional baseball with the Baxter Springs Whiz Kids before he joined the Yankees in 1951. By that time, the Yankees weren't just defending champions, but they had won the World Series a record 13 times. And Joe DiMaggio was part of 8 of them. The Yankees were a dynasty, and DiMaggio was a figure of nobility. So when Mickey Mantle joined the New York team after their 13th title, he was looking forward to playing with Joe more than anybody. In an interview, Mickey Mantle had this to say about his new teammate: "Heroes are people who are all good with no bad in them. That's the way I always saw Joe DiMaggio. He was, beyond question, one of the greatest players of the century." So with obvious chemistry, where did things get sour? Evidence suggests that they were never bound to get along. DiMaggio was an Italian immigrant from the West Coast who grew up tough and gritty. Mantle, on the other hand, was this Oklahoma-raised prodigy who beamed with optimism. If their backgrounds didn't make enough of a difference, their age did. Joe DiMaggio was more than a decade and a half older than Mickey Mantle, and this had them at odds with each other. On one hand, you had DiMaggio, who was a veteran, a tiger who had earned his stripes, but a player who would soon have to answer to Father Time. And then there was Mickey Mantle, the 20-year-old who was heralded as the future of the franchise. It was almost as if fate had pitched them against each other. Despite how much of a promising future Mantle had, he still knew his place. And in the 1951 World Series, these two crossed paths in a way that suggested that the Yankee teammates might have been more foes than friends. In an all-New York affair with the Yankees facing the Giants were at bat when a ball was heading towards the outfield. Mantle saw the ball heading between him and DiMaggio, and getting in the way of a player who was revered amongst Yankee fans would have turned him into New York's public enemy number 1. But Mantle ended up hurting himself trying to protect his reputation. "It was Joe's ball. I was getting out of the way. Maybe I stepped into a hole, but something let go in my knee. I heard it pop. I don't know just what happened." But despite his best efforts to get on DiMaggio's good side, Joe actually resented the young Mantle. And it wasn't because of something he did to him. Joe just hated the fact that Mickey was a party animal. Although they only played together for a year and won a World Series, DiMaggio wasn't a fan of the way Mickey loved alcohol. And when Mickey was bedridden with liver cancer, DiMaggio didn't feel sympathetic towards him, stating, "You know, Doc, I don't really feel sorry for the guy. He did it to himself." Another person DiMaggio doesn't feel sorry for is player number 6, Ted Williams. The hatred that Joe DiMaggio has for Ted Williams stems from nothing more than their rivalry, their individual rivalry, that is. As far as teams were concerned, there was nobody to stand up to the Yankees. But in the American League, the Red Sox were the closest the Yankees could label as worthy opponents, although it was never a fair fight. In the time that Joe DiMaggio won 9 World Series titles, all Ted Williams could brag about was a single World Series appearance in which he lost. But what really draws comparisons of these two great players is the accolades they've earned at the plate. DiMaggio did win 3 American League MVP titles, but as a batter, it seemed as if Ted Williams was better. He had several multiple batting titles as well as 2 Triple Crowns. But the real heat of their rivalry was 1941. Both players were accomplishing things the game had never thought possible. Joe DiMaggio was on a 56-game hitting streak. This was unheard of. It was the stuff of legend. A feat of this magnitude deserved all the attention in the MLB world, but that's the problem. It wasn't getting it. Because over in Boston, Ted Williams was having a season where his batting average was .4 to .06. A batting average above 0.2 is average, 0.25 is where stars are at. Legends normally have an average above .3, but ever since Ted Williams had a .4 season, the major leagues have never seen something like that. This made his name get brought up in conversations along with Joe DiMaggio. And of course, Ted Williams was flattered because he admired the Yankees superstar. He was the greatest all-around player I ever saw. His career cannot be summed up in numbers and awards. But here's the thing. Joe DiMaggio didn't feel the same way. He had this to say about their rivalry. "So much was made of my rivalry with Ted, and yet I never felt it was really there." It really pissed off Joe DiMaggio that the media were making up a rivalry that really didn't exist. It made him really mad to the point that he started to hate Ted Williams. The record holder felt that with no World Series titles, there was no rivalry to push. Just like this next person, DiMaggio has subtle hate for. Player number 5, Jackie Robinson. He is one of the few baseball players who managed to annoy Joe DiMaggio with how good he was. As much as he was garnering a lot of public attention towards him, it was never at the level that started drawing comparisons with Joe DiMaggio. Moreover, Jack Robinson was more astounded by the barriers he was breaking and not exactly his individual excellence. So how did he get on Joe DiMaggio's hate list? That would be a result of his on-field antics. Nothing gets on the nerves of fielding teams like stealing bases. And in the 1950s, no one was doing it better than Jackie Robinson. He was averaging close to 20 steals a season. And in the 1955 World Series matchup between the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Yankees, Jackie Robinson's base-stealing antics proved to be the decisive edge in his team beating the Yankees. And it really hurt DiMaggio that he couldn't do anything to prevent the Yankees from losing that World Series title since he had already retired. By the time you factor in the fact that Jackie Robinson used to throw the fielder's team off by dancing on the base, he became a nuisance to play against. Joe DiMaggio hated this so much that he was relieved that he didn't spend his prime years dealing with an opponent like this. If he did, he could have lost his temper and done something he wouldn't have been too proud of. What makes his hatred towards Jackie Robinson an awkward one is that the feeling isn't mutual. On several occasions, Robinson has had nothing but praise for the Yankee legend. This makes Joe DiMaggio look like an angry old head, but in reality, he's nothing like that. Player number 4, Whitey Kurowski. Joe DiMaggio lay awake many nights after October 5th, 1942, turning over in his mind the moment Whitey Kurowski's bat met Red Ruffing's 1-1 pitch in the 9th inning of Game 5 at Yankee Stadium. The world seemed to pause. The series stood tied, 2 apiece, Yankees and Cardinals locked in a deadlock. DiMaggio, who had carried the weight of New York's baseball expectations for years, felt destiny slip through his fingers the moment the ball soared past the left field fence. That swing from Kurowski was sudden, uncanny, and it was the blow that shattered the Yankees' dream, the single moment that turned DiMaggio's perfect World Series record into a stain. Kurowski had not been a superstar before that series. He hit just .254 in 115 games during the 1942 regular season. Not a prodigy, but solid, hungry, with flashes of power. Yet in Game 2, Kurowski tripled to give the Cardinals a 3-0 lead early. DiMaggio had watched that, seethed at that. And in Game 5, after being shut down by Ruffing earlier in the series, 3 strikeouts in Game 1 alone, Kurowski stepped up and changed history. From that moment on, DiMaggio hated Kurowski, not with public words, but inside, where the greatest anger burns. He saw in Kurowski everything that denied him glory. Every time Kurowski's name was praised in the press, DiMaggio's jaw tightened. When the Cardinals celebrated, when stories hailed Kurowski's 9th inning home run as one of baseball's immortal moments, DiMaggio felt like the world was mocking what could have been his. For DiMaggio, this loss was not just a defeat, It was a personal failure defined by one man's swing. He had played many games, hit many home runs, dominated many seasons, but never before had one hit, one player, felt so toxic. Whitey Kurowski became a ghost in Joe's memory. Every time DiMaggio stepped up to the plate, every time he looked at third base, Kurowski's face was there, smiling, triumphant. Ken Keltner is player number 3 on DiMaggio's hate list. It's funny why Joe DiMaggio hates him. And it's all because the Cleveland Indians' third baseman was really just doing his job. But a look into just why exactly DiMaggio felt this way about him will show that the Yankee legend wasn't out of pocket for his animosity. It all started on May 15, 1941. It was a regular season game against the White Sox. It didn't seem like much at the time, but nobody thought it was about to be a very legendary game. Joe DiMaggio ripped a single off White Sox lefty Eddie Smith. This was the game where his legendary run started. The next 2 months would see the Italian-American immortalized in the history of the game. 91 hits from 223 at-bats produced a 56-game streak, where Joe DiMaggio just could not be struck out. This had never happened before. So instantly, Joe DiMaggio became the front and center of every sports headline. The world wanted to know how long he could continue and who would do the impossible of striking him out. Every pitcher was out to strike him out, and he knew that. And to Joe, this made every hit more satisfying, and with every game, it looked less like a matter of when, but if, the streak could even end. But it eventually had to happen. On July 17, 1941, at the Municipal Stadium, the Yankees faced the Indians. Just like that fateful day back in May, nobody really thought much of history being written that day. The Indians' third baseman, Ken Keltner, made 2 exquisite backhanded stops that robbed DiMaggio of hits in the 1st and 7th innings. Later, Lou Boudreau turned a 9th-inning double play on a grounder that wiped out DiMaggio's last chance. 3 sensational defensive plays, and the nation watched its summer's miracle end. When it comes to pitchers, nobody got on DiMaggio's nerves more than player number 2, Satchel Paige. Joe DiMaggio stood in the batting cage, bat in hand, eyes fixed on the pitcher's mound, thinking about that afternoon in 1936 when he first saw Satchel Paige wind up. It was an exhibition game in Oakland. DiMaggio, still young, had heard tales of Satchel striking out lineups, of batters simply unable to time his fastball, of him pausing just long enough to unnerve a hitter before the pitch came. Satchel Paige was more than good. He was legendary. He was known for throwing heat so fast that even the greats said his fastball looked like a change of pace alongside that pistol bullet old Satch shoots up to the plate. He pitched in thousands of barnstorming games, racked up enormous win totals in the Negro Leagues, and turned exhibition games into duels where he usually came out on top. So when DiMaggio faced Paige, he often felt cheated because Paige's reputation made him already half beat before the first pitch. Suppose DiMaggio thought, if I just get a solid fastball, I'll drive it. But Paige might mix a hesitation pitch, or a changeup, or what folks called the two-hump blooper, so well that DiMaggio's eyes misfired. His timing betrayed. It makes sense that DiMaggio would hate Paige, not out of envy exactly, but frustration. DiMaggio was used to being the best. He prided himself on hitting, but Paige forced him to hunt, to doubt. So DiMaggio might have felt Satchel was this nearly impossible benchmark, someone who made every at-bat against him stress-filled, who robbed him of easy hits, and who humiliated other greats in exhibitions with apparent casualness. At the end, maybe DiMaggio didn't hate Satchel Paige. Maybe he hated the idea of facing someone so unstoppable, someone who exposed the limits even of the best hitters. That mix of admiration, frustration, and competitiveness, that's what stoked his dislike. Because every time Paige took the mound, DiMaggio was reminded of how much harder it was to be great. But the person Joe DiMaggio hates the most is Casey Stengel. But here's why this makes no sense. He never got to play with or against Joe DiMaggio. That's because Casey Stengel started playing in the Major League 2 years before Joe DiMaggio was born. Although his batting ability was just slightly above average, it was never stellar or good enough to make him a legend. However, he did win 2 World Series titles with the New York Giants. But why would Joe DiMaggio have a problem with a player he never got to play with or against, like the other players in this video? Well, that's because Casey Stengel was Joe DiMaggio's manager for the last 3 years of his career, and he didn't enjoy his time under him. Joe DiMaggio felt he had earned his stripes and deserved certain privileges that other players were still working towards. After all, when Stengel became the Yankees coach, DiMaggio had been with the Yankees for 11 years and had won 7 titles. But here's where the tension between the two of them started. Stengel didn't care who the best players were or any of that. If Casey Stengel wanted a certain change made, he never considered the feelings of any of his players. The first time Casey Stengel ruffled DiMaggio's feathers was back in early July of 1950 when he made the record holder play first base instead of the outfield position. DiMaggio had been playing in the MLB for over a decade, and he never had to play first base until now. DiMaggio did eventually obey his coach's order, but he made sure to show how unhappy he was. However, this wouldn't be the last time that Stengel would decide that DiMaggio wasn't a fan of. A month after the first base incident happened, Stengel pulled DiMaggio out of the starting lineup because he wasn't batting well enough. This would seem like the rational thing to do since DiMaggio was in the twilight years of his career. But given the enmity that existed between them, DiMaggio was always going to take it as a sign of disrespect. Yet, there was something that Stengel did that DiMaggio found more demeaning than this. During a 1951 game, Stengel legit removed DiMaggio in the middle of a game for the unproven rookie Johnny Ha. DiMaggio was in so much disbelief that he stood still in the outfield for a few moments before walking off. When the media asked Stengel about it, he said, "Joe hasn't been playing good ball. He has a sore leg, and the rest will help him." As much as Stengel was just doing his job, even he couldn't deny that he and Joe didn't have good chemistry. He's been quoted to say this, "I came in here and a fella asked me to have a drink. I said I don't drink. Then another fella said, I hear you and Joe DiMaggio aren't speaking, and I said I'll take that drink." There you have it, the 8 players Joe DiMaggio hated the most. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and check out other videos like this on our page.